Hello and welcome to the Columbia Daily Tribune's college basketball webcast. This is sports editor Joe Walljasper along with Tribune basketball beat writer Steve Walentik. Steve, Missouri coming off a 72-66 victory over Kansas State in their Big 12 opener. What did that game tell you about Missouri that you didn't know before?
Well, the biggest thing I think is that they're tougher than I would have expected. Kansas State's a really physical team and played really physical on Saturday, and Missouri matched it. There were a ton of fouls in the game, and most of them I think were deserved. But I think some teams play a team like K-State that comes in and tries to rough up the game, back down. I don't think Missouri did that. I think they were able to get Kansas State's big guys into some foul trouble because they were playing aggressively. They defended well throughout. They out-rebounded Kansas State. Kansas State's a really good rebounding team, particularly on the offensive glass, and Missouri beat them there as well. I think that's all good signs for this team going forward into Big 12 play.
They also were down at a couple points in the game where it looked like they had a chance of getting away from them. I think they were down by 10 in the first half. They were down by 6 with about 6 minutes left in the game, and both times they came back from those situations. But that's a little bit maybe a sign of mental toughness as much as anything, and a sign of how much the crowd helps them out too. Because a little spark from the crowd, I think, really helps a team that plays the way they do. And I was kind of impressed with Lawrence Bowers as far as just playing inside with the K-State guys, because he was a guy that we weren't sure. He's a very talented or skilled guy, but you weren't sure if he could get in there and battle for rebounds, and he got a big one there at the end when J.T. Tiller misses a free throw. So he was, I thought, one of the positives that came out of that game, too.
Without a doubt, that was one of his 6 offensive rebounds in the game, which is pretty impressive. And as far as the Tigers coming back, I mean, in the second half, they were down 6. They'd gone almost 10 minutes without a field goal. To win a game when you do that is pretty impressive. Just obviously it speaks to how well they were defending. Because they couldn't get anything going offensively until Marcus Denmon hit a couple of big threes there to finally wake them up with about 5.5 minutes to play.
On that topic, Zaire Taylor kind of deservedly so got a lot of the credit for hitting the three-pointer that basically wins the game. He also scores 14 points, made 9 out of 10 free throws, which nobody else was doing. But it seemed to me like Denmon, if not for him hitting those 2 three-pointers, maybe there isn't a game to win. I thought he was the guy that really kind of saved their bacon there in the second half. It was interesting also after the game when Mike Anderson was talking about what he liked about Denmon. It was like every time he walks down and looks at the players on the bench, he always looks him right in the eye and wants to get in the game. I think he kind of likes Denmon's mentality. Do you think he's kind of become maybe their most consistent guy, Marcus Denmon?
You could make the argument. I mean, right now he's averaging 11 points a game. He's the second leading scorer on the team. He's had double figures in 10 of the 16 games. He's shooting 44% from 3. This is a guy who only made 30% of his three-pointers a year ago. And I think what Mike Anderson's really encouraged by with him is that he's doing more than just shooting threes, which is what we saw a lot of last year, him just kind of spotting up beyond the arc and letting it fly. He wasn't able to do other things because his legs were bothering him. He had surgery in the offseason on his knee and seems to be recovering nicely from that. Mike Anderson, is as important as those 2 threes were that he hit, he was just as excited to see him hit that little leaner off the glass late that I believe tied the game. That's something that I think was Denmon's game all throughout high school in Kansas City, and one of the reasons that this Missouri staff really fell in love with him was watching him do those kind of things, and they never got to see that last year from him. So that's definitely something that they're encouraged by going forward.
I think he's kind of a tough-minded kid, too. You can kind of look at the minutes some guys play under Anderson and kind of pick out the tough-minded ones from the not. Leo was always in the doghouse, but then he would play a kid like Butterfield more minutes than you could really understand. It's kind of the same with Ramsey. I think he really likes his mentality, too. You can sort of, to me, he falls in that category of guys he likes just kind of the way they play the game.
Definitely, I think so. He's a guy who's worked to get where he is, and he's worked hard to do it. He came from a tougher background, raised by his grandmother, and he's earned his spot here and seems to be making the most of it.
Kind of the thing that I think most people are talking about from the game, maybe more than the game itself, was the incident on the sideline where Frank Martin gave his player, whatever you want to call it, he called it a flick. It looked like, when you see the video of it, maybe a little more than that. It kind of hit him right in the chest and knocked him back a couple steps. He did apologize for it right after the game. What was your take on the seriousness of that incident?
Well, I didn't get to see the play as it happened. I've only seen replays of it after the fact, and I think we can agree that it was more than a flick. It seemed like he gave Chris Merriweather a pretty good shot, and Merriweather sort of recoiled afterwards, and then kind of he slapped at him a little bit. I think it was more serious than Martin made it seem, but I think this shows you what a good PR move it is for when these sorts of things happen to step forward.
Get ahead of the story.
Get ahead of the story, take responsibility, apologize. He sort of parsed his apology with a reference to these are sensitive times, and you kind of wonder if he's he doesn't necessarily agree that this should have been a deal at all, but he's at least taking some responsibility for what happened, and I think that's one of the reasons this has died down as quickly as it has.
The one thing that would concern me if I was his boss is that it even occurred for him to do it at all makes you think this is not an isolated incident in terms of what happens in practice behind closed doors if he's willing to do this in front of ESPN cameras and 15,000 people. And even in part of his apology, he kind of hedged it with, well, they expect football and basketball coaches to be different people in front of the cameras than they are behind closed doors, and it kind of makes you think, well, what is going on behind? If this seems okay to you, and the kid said it was no big deal. The teammate said it was no big deal, but also, what is the kid going to say? The coach is in charge of his playing time. If you do make a big stink about it, then suddenly you're a pariah on your own campus. Now, he probably did think it was no big deal, and it probably is no big deal, but it's just a situation, if you're a coach, why even go there?
Because you don't have to. And you see other coaches get their message across not doing things like that. I will say, though, Kansas State players all seem to really like Frank Martin. And, they call him Frank. I talked to Jacob Pullen last week before the game, and he had great things to say about the job that he's done in the 3 years he's been in charge there. I think, he's gotten guys that are receptive to his methods.
And he doesn't have a ton of kids transfer out. I mean, it doesn't seem like people are dissatisfied with him within the program, but to me, it's just one little unnecessary thing you can eliminate from your style.
Agreed.
All right, lastly, Missouri now goes on the road and plays at Texas Tech and at Oklahoma. How winnable do you think these road games are? Because Missouri has really, I think, established themselves now where they are just such a tough team to beat at home. You start thinking, well, if they can pick off a few on the road, they're going to be in good shape.
Well, I think we should start out by saying that it's going to be really hard to win anywhere on the road in the Big 12 this year based on what teams have done to this point. One team has lost a home game so far. That was Iowa State.
112-1, I think.
Yeah, I believe that's correct. Missouri hasn't won in Lubbock since 2000. Texas Tech hasn't always had great teams during that period. Missouri's still not been able to get it done. Now, Missouri hasn't always had great teams during that period as well. I do think, Texas Tech and Oklahoma have some signs of being vulnerable. That, Texas Tech lost to Oklahoma State in their opener by 29 points, and Oklahoma got waxed by 31 against Baylor. They're two of the three worst defensive teams in the Big 12. They're both struggling offensively as well. Oklahoma in particular is very young, which I think could play into Missouri's hands because they do. As much as Mike Anderson likes to talk about how they're a really young team, they have a lot of experienced guys at this point, guys in their second Big 12 season who played a lot of minutes. So I think, they have a shot to win both of these games. I wouldn't necessarily pick them to win both of these games, but if they could get out of this week, 2-1 in Big 12 play and then have a week off to get ready for Nebraska at home, I think he'd be pretty pleased with that, and I think he should be.
All right, well, tune in next week. We'll talk about those two games and look forward to Missouri's home game against Nebraska.